Thanks, Bruce, and thank you for those wonderful remarks. You know, one of the things that I took from what you said was that we are all designers. That is, everyone on this call, all 90 of us are designers. And if you're a business leader, you can't escape that fact. And I think that's the point you're trying to make. So what I'd like to do is plumb some of the ideas that you put forth in your remarks and see if we can get a translation of those ideas into the contemporary problems that we face right now. So I want to say that one of the most profound diagrams I saw on MC24 that in your book was the diagram of nature, culture, business, and design, and it's reverse. You showed that today. And the fact is that we are all designing nature. So what does this diagram mean for business thinking and planning? And in particular, can you talk about what it means within the context of climate change?
Sure. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for being part of this, David. Yeah, that diagram really kind of blew my mind. You know, when we first developed it, and it was, you know, quite controversial. I mean, people really said, Bruce, you know, you're mad for power. And I said, it's not about that. It's about responsibility. And you're absolutely right. If you're a leader, you're a designer. And if you listen to the language colloquially, if you just listen to the way that we actually use the word design colloquially, it's smarter than the way we use it professionally. In other words, we talk about designing programs, designing events, designing all, excuse me, all kinds of things that we wouldn't think of as a design practice. We design our businesses. And for me, that concept of actually applying design to enterprise at all scales is really the method that we developed. And so if your enterprise is a business, an organization, if it's a cultural enterprise, and even if it's a natural enterprise, like ecosystems, river systems. I mean, think about the Mississippi River. You know, Mississippi River Valley is the wealthiest, most productive valley in the history of humankind. And it is so because we control it. Because we control the river and design its route, and even design the disasters that happen. We design the floods, you know, contrary to most of our expectation. We make decisions about who floods and when, and that is really how we are applying design. What we need to understand in terms of climate change is that we're going to have to take on design at a scale that we haven't imagined. And especially beyond our political systems. In other words, our political systems are really local, they're, you know, mostly local entities, and local may be, you know, the nation. But the climate is global. And our global systems for design are really just developing. We're just beginning to be able to control and to design applications at that bigger scale and take responsibility for it. I mean, if you think about, you know, I saw this incredible piece in the New York Times recently about the cold blob that has emerged south of Greenland. Right? Now, the cold blob could change the course of the Gulf Stream. Currently, England has palm trees, but it's on the same latitude as Canada. And if the cold blob changes the course of the Gulf Stream, you can forget about palm trees in England. And so starting to actually think and work and design at that bigger scale and take responsibility at the bigger scale, I think is really what what the a method of life-centered design is all about. Does that make sense?
I think it does. I appreciate that. And so I'd like to follow up with a related question. So one of the principles that you have in MC24 is to compete with beauty. Can you tell us a little bit about the relationship between beauty and behavior change? Changes like joy and desire, those kinds of emotions that come when you confront beauty. And the importance of beauty when we look at a big issue like climate change, because most of us, I think, tend to think that climate change, really, aesthetics is something that you sprinkle on top of a good pizza. It's not something that's essential to the making of a pizza.
Yeah.
So maybe you could talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, I mean, I think you're absolutely right. You know, if you walked into an architecture school today as a student and you put up a project and you said, I did it because it's beautiful, you would get an F. You, you would fail. And it really, you know, I sort of saw that with my own eyes and realized, wow, we really don't understand the power of beauty. We don't teach it. We don't talk about it. We really don't have a methodology of beauty. And even in the arts, a lot of art has abandoned beauty as a concept, as an ambition. And I think beauty is the most powerful force on the planet. We will do anything for beauty. We will suffer for beauty. We'll pay more. We'll travel. We'll move heaven and earth for beauty. And there's, I mean, just watch every day what we will do. And so beauty is one of the most powerful forces, but we almost don't consider it in our business. You know, I ask my clients, what's your beauty strategy? Almost never do they have an answer. Steve Jobs had an answer, and he produced the most valuable company in human history. And it really is, I mean, think about Apple and take the beauty out of it and see what's left. You have a reasonably good technology company. You put beauty into Apple and you have changed the world. You've created a new culture. You've changed the behavior that you want. And I think for me, the only way out of the crisis of climate change is beauty. The only way we will win is to make smart things more beautiful, more successful, more exciting, more compelling than the old way. If you think we can do it by, you know, with stick and not carrot, we've tried that for 100 years. You know, we've known for decades the nature of the problem, and we've scolded people to try to change their behavior. It can't work. What we need is to make the new solutions way more exciting than the old ones. And that's really where design comes in. And it's the biggest opportunity in human history. The challenges that we face today are the biggest we've ever faced. And they are also the biggest entrepreneurial opportunities.
So this takes me to my next question, which when I read it, it kind of shocked me. And I'm not so easily shocked, but when I read about whole brain thinking and changing our brains, it seemed to me that suddenly you're talking about designing my biology. And my first response was to push back on it. But then as I thought about it more, maybe you could tell us a little bit about the importance of affected knowledge, things like empathy, cultivated attention, curiosity, awareness, and experience, receiving, responding, and valuing change, and technical knowledge, which is what my institution, the University of Maryland, delves into most heavily. When we were wrestling with the grand challenges of our century, right? So what does affected knowledge have to do with, in particular, in the environment of racial justice, diversity, and inclusion.
Excuse me. You have to begin with the concept that we can change our brain. And I've actually seen film of the brain growing itself as it learns. So you have to start to imagine the brain as a physical analog to the thinking that we do. In other words, it actually grows pathways. So when you're learning, when you're when you're experiencing something new, the brain is actually kind of dealing with it physically. It's creating itself. And so when you look at the neuroscience, you realize that, a lot of people say when they work with me that they're brain nerds, that we're kind of dealing with new things, and we're kind of taking them on in a way that is really challenging as a way of thinking, and their brain actually hurts. And that is true because your brain is actually growing when you're kind of engaging new ideas. And so once you start to kind of understand that, oh, since we are going to grow the brain and we can do it, that neuroplasticity is accessible to us at any age, by the way, that we can actually grow it into, we can do this in our later years, then we can start to actually design the methodology of developing the brain that we need, and really thinking about thinking in the right way. And ultimately that that helps us. It doesn't make you talented, and it doesn't, some brains are more talented than others. It just is. It doesn't make you talented, but it helps you move towards what you need in terms of empathy. Right? In other words, you can actually develop your brain capacity. And Sandy Chapman at the Brain Performance Institute in Dallas at UT, University of Texas, UT Dallas, is actually working on doubling the brain capacity. So imagine what that means, that you can actually double your capacity. It's an astounding concept. And she's building the kind of tools and methods and especially metrics to be able to do that. And what we one of the principles in MC24 is designed for the power double double, and that is the double exponential of expanding capacity and expanding access. In other words, as we double our population, we have more brains, and if we double our capacity in technology to really apply those brains, you have what is happening today, which is the double double. But if you add Sandy Chapman's doubling of the brain capacity itself, you really have a triple double, which explains why we're moving so quickly, why we are able to develop a vaccine in less than a year with 100 teams around the world taking on that challenge. And that's ultimately how we're going to deal with the kind of challenges that we are already facing in what I call the cluster. And when it comes to applying that to racial injustice and the other kind of forms of crisis that you mentioned, you really see the power of empathy, because in the end, a kind of anti-environmental idea is the same as a racist idea. It's a real shortcoming in our empathy. It's a shortcoming in our ability to experience and understand the kind of challenges of another life, whether that life is an ecosystem or a person. Those forms of life are having a different experience than our own. We need a methodology that allows us to really understand that form of life. I hope that wasn't too extreme.
Wasn't too.
Does that make sense?
It does, and I think what I hear you saying is that our knowledge in the affected knowledge is actually able to grow as rapidly and completely as we put emphasis on the growth and transformation of technical knowledge. And so that gives me great hope. It means that sooner or later I might actually have a way of relating better to my wife, which would be a good thing.
That's always a good thing.
So this,
Yeah, I think that, I mean, if you think about, think about the number of times you have a bad experience in dealing with a company of some kind. I mean, what they're telling you is we don't care. And what you see as a common denominator in design is we care. Like I did a lecture for the Cooper Hewitt, the Smithsonian Museum of Design, and it was on their collection. They asked me to do a lecture on their collection, and so when I looked at the diversity of the collection, it's everything from technologies to weaving, and I mean you know anything that is designed is in their collection. I tried to understand what's the common denominator. And the common denominator is caring. That we simply care more about the user experience, that we care about the beauty, we care about the utility, we care about how well it works for you, how you touch it, how you feel when you touch it. We care about that emotional affect. And for me, that caring is the common denominator of design. It's the core methodology, that like if you want to know what the DNA of design is, it's caring. It's the ability to understand someone else's problem and understand it in context. And that is, I think, what the life-centered design is really all about. It's really understanding, how do I do this in a way that is sympathetic with all of life? When I talk to indigenous leaders, they say they're related to the rocks and the grasses and the animals. They're related. And you have to understand that you are part of this living world.
So this leads me to take our discussion towards design thinking and how it might be applied. So several years ago, IBM conducted the most extensive survey of world CEOs that's ever been done. And from that survey, the CEOs said that their biggest challenge that they faced was finding creative people and stimulating creative thinking. It seems to me massive change is about how business needs to think. So can you tell us, what does design thinking mean? And how do you use it in the decision-making process of your typical bureaucratic business?
It's a great question. You're absolutely right. A methodology of design is not constrained by the visual. So if you look in art practice, Marcel Duchamp, an artist in the early 20th century, he said, I want to liberate art from what he called the tyranny of the eye. Right? He wanted art to be thinking in the service of the mind, he said. Right? So he actually did radical things like signing a urinal and declaring that a metal bottle rack was an artwork simply by signing it. And he liberated art from the from the visual, and art became anything. I mean, if you look at art today, it could really be anything. We're trying to do that for design, to say, look, design is a methodology of thinking. It's in service of the mind, and it can be applied to any challenge. Any problem that you have is the potential for a design methodology. The kind of important things that you do to kind of apply design, apply this way of thinking. You're absolutely right that I'm very familiar. I love that report from IBM. It led to a lot of our work. For instance, with Northwestern University, we helped to develop what we call whole brain engineering, which is really bringing the analytics together with the creativity. So we're not abandoning the analytics of engineering. We're adding the creativity of design. And the dean of engineering, Julio Tino, explained it to me this way. He said, "Look, if I ask an engineer to make a bridge, they will say, 'How thin can I make the bridge?' If I ask you to make a bridge, you will say, 'Why do you need a bridge? Maybe a boat would be nicer.'" and he's absolutely right. And I thought, what a brilliant insight, that he's absolutely right. I mean, we start by asking, why are we doing this? And I think that in business, that's such a powerful question that we can actually explore. Why would we want to do this? Why would customers like it? What would this help them with? How would they experience this? And so we start to actually think about, we get out of our delivery and into their reception. Right? How are they receiving this? And one of the things that I like to say is that I don't care about what I say, I care about what you hear. Right? Most people, when they're communicating, they tick the box once they say it. So you've often heard people say, "Well, I told her twice. She didn't hear you once." So taking responsibility for what people hear is what this method is all about. When you take a life-centered design approach, you start to think about their experience, their context, their environment, their ecosystem, their reception. How will they hear this? How will they see this? And it really changes fundamentally how you work. So I'm not sure if I answered your question exactly.
No, I think you did, the issue of why I think is very fascinating, because it has to do with how you frame problems, right?
Yeah, yeah.
And so my professor, my major professor at University of California, Berkeley, was Horst Riddle, and his good friend C. West Churchman, who was at the business school, talked about wicked problems. That is, those problems that have no right answer because they have no stopping rule. We don't know when you have the correct answer. These problems defy a definitive problem formation. So wicked problems define the problems of the 21st century. I think that's what you've been saying. Mm-hmm. So to address wicked problems, you talk about assembling something I never heard about before, but I thought it made sense: wicked teams. You got wicked problems, you need wicked teams. So can you tell us what that term means, wicked teams? And why is it so important for today's middle management business leader? And what would a wicked team look like?
This concept came from, it came out of a collaboration with a man named Bill Buxton. And Bill was the inventor of Maya, software Maya, that really revolutionized manufacturing and design. And he's now I think the head of research for Microsoft. And Bill came and worked in our studio for about a year as our chief scientist. And he told me he was going to do that. I said, "Bill, I really don't have a call for a chief scientist." But he said, so he came and worked on massive change. It was an incredible experience. And he said, the way that you work, he called it a Renaissance team. He said, you can't have a Renaissance person anymore, but you can have a Renaissance team. And that's what you're doing. And I realized that he was right, that we had intuitively developed a methodology where when we take on a problem, you don't have to know how to do it. You don't have to have the knowledge to solve it. Mostly I get commissioned to do things I don't know how to do, which is when you think about it, what kind of business is that? But mostly I get to solve problems that other people can't solve, and I've often failed. So we're often, the second or third team to address a problem. One of the things that, so what Bill realized we were doing was we were assembling teams. And the idea of the team was actually to make a Renaissance team that you can't have a Renaissance person. So on a Renaissance team, you can have all the, you can have really a Renaissance capacity at an even higher order, but you're making it up by a number of people, not a single individual. And that methodology, we realized actually there's a method to doing that. So you need to know how to be a Renaissance team player, how to be on a wicked team. And so in the book, we actually identify the 7 behaviors of a wicked team player. Right? And interestingly, the people, some of my colleagues at Northwestern, I'm a fellow in the engineering school, and some of my colleagues there did a study to show how what is the makeup of an effective diverse team, and they showed that if you can get about 65 to 70% people who've worked together before, and 30% people who've never worked together before, those are the most effective diverse teams that you can create. And they did it by studying Broadway. They basically looked at all the performance of Broadway over the last 120 years or so, and because it's all quantified, it's very precise who worked with who, and how successful each production was. So you can really look at success and diversity of teams and get a metric for how to do it. But that's really the method in the book really is how to be a team player. Whoops, you're muted.
Sorry. I think one of the things that happens when you get a diverse group of people around the table is that you have different ways of looking at the problem. And so you don't quickly collapse into the problem that's easy to solve through technical knowledge. But the debate is, what exactly is the problem, right?
Yeah.
So that leads me to my next question, which is, I'd like to try and get more down to earth if I could. So rather than talking about the high level perspective on the challenges that we face, how do you instigate these problems, or I'm sorry, how do you instigate these principles in a large or small business enterprise or in a public organization? And so I'm a person working in an organization and I want to instigate these sorts of things. How do I go about doing that?
We work with our clients. I mean, the most intensive work we can do is a real collaboration. So that's the kind of far end of the spectrum. The least intensive is, in the book, there are specific methods for how to do it. So you can really take an idea like zone of opportunity. The zone of opportunity method is outlined in the book, and it's a very simple way of understanding potential. Really understanding the complexity of a problem, developing a kind of project manifesto. One of the things that you talk about is the project brief, how we define the problem. And in design, what we've been doing for 50 years is trying to make that brief as small as possible, like to get it down to a single sentence or even a single word if we could. And our approach is to go the other direction entirely and to make the brief as complex and rich as possible, so that we have a kind of bigger field of understanding, really understanding the ecosystem of the problem. And the zone of opportunity is one of the tools that we use to do that. So you can kind of use get the book, use the tools in the book, all the way to engaging us and working with designers to consult and really develop the methodology.
So Bruce, we have some questions from our participants. And I'd like to encourage the participants to continue to submit questions. But the first one I'd like to give you from the group is this past year was no picnic in the woods. What do you take from the pandemic, and how do you make a plan that will put us in a better place as an organization and as a community?
Great question. I think one of the gifts of the pandemic, the few gifts, is that it allowed us to see things could change. So things that we thought were, I mean, things that I thought would never, we wouldn't be able to do them for another 20, 30 years, are happening literally overnight. And I think it really is, a tipping point, to use Malcolm Gladwell's metaphor. The idea that suddenly we can change things. So I think that has, quite dramatically changed the landscape. People are able to imagine things differently now, for a short window. I think it's going to snap back in a not too productive way to the old ways. So I think we have this very unique opening to kind of rethink things and do new things in the short term that can really change the way that we work and live. And I think people have an appetite for that right now.
So the next question, I think, is something that you know quite a bit about from our previous discussions, and that is, how would you apply your design thinking principles in the complex, hierarchical, and bureaucratic system of higher education?
That's a great question. Education is practically a design-free zone. I mean, we really do it by convention. We do it the way that it's been done. And so you still, like I remember reading once, if you woke up from 100, year sleep, you would not know what this was, you would not know what a telephone was. But if you walked into the class, you would be like, yeah, I get this. I remember this. This is just like it used to be. And that concept, I think, really dominates. I've been working for a long time with Michael Crow, who's the president of ASU. And Michael talks about filial pietism, which is undue reverence for the ancestors, right? Undue reverence for the way things were. And that's, I think, what we suffer from in education. And Michael shows that you can't possibly get to our goals with the current system. We can't possibly educate America with the current system. And we are simply cutting generations of people out of the deal in the way that we're currently doing it. And so Michael talks about inventing the 5 realms of education, the 5, a new way of thinking about the experience of education and making the experience a product. When we did the IWB, the Institute Without Boundaries, we said the content is not the product, which is anathema to most universities. Most universities think the content is what we're selling. But we know from the data that half of the content of a technical degree is outmoded by the time the student graduates, because things are changing so fast. So if the content is, if half of it is broken, it better not be the product. The real product is experience. And that's where design comes in. And the opportunity right now to redesign the experience of education, to make it accessible, cheap, fast. I mean, I had my own experience with college. I went to art school, and I failed. I failed out in about a year and a half. So after a year and a half, I got a job as a designer, and I thought I failed college. It wasn't until recently that I began to think about it and realized, gosh, I did college in 1.5 years, and it had the effect that I hoped to, which is it blew my mind. I learned a new language. I gained a new tribe, and I got a job doing what I loved, which is what college is supposed to do. But we can't imagine doing college in a year and a half because we think it's a time-based system that you have to stay for 4 years. And so I think rethinking the design of it is one of the great opportunities of our time.
So, and I think, ASU is an interesting model because it's trying to find a way to transform the land grant institution and make itself accessible to the increasingly large population of Arizona, which makes it a big challenge, and also talks about how we might address issues as it relates to young people as they prepare for their life on this planet. One of the questions we have here says, can you talk about the tangible first steps in moving to a design-focused methodology? And in particular, the person who writes this is about, works in the space of improving opportunity for children. So what might we do in terms of designing their context, their communities, and their interactions? Could you talk a little bit about that?
Sure. I think opportunity is the best word in that question, and that's where design begins. So, we've worked with a company called Freeman for a long time, and I work as their chief design officer. And one of the things that we realized is that we did a kind of cycle of a project, which is opportunity, formulate, build, and debrief. So there's a kind of cycle that you need to go through, which is you start with opportunity, you think about what we're going to do, you formulate ideas, you build them, you decide and you build one, and then you learn, you debrief and you learn, and then you start again. But that first step is the most important thing you can do, and it's opportunity. In other words, you need to take a step back, not forward. You take a step back and you start to try to understand the ecosystem, try to understand the complexity of the situation that you're dealing with, and what is the biggest opportunity we could accomplish. And that moment at the beginning is the moment where you set the value of the project. In other words, if you define that opportunity small, then the whole project is about small. If you define that opportunity big, the whole project has the potential for big. And really understanding, when we define that opportunity, we're setting the agenda. So that first step is the most critical step, and it's a step back, not forward. It's a step back to open a space where we can talk about the opportunity, where we don't rush to build. We don't immediately decide what we're going to do. We actually open a space where we can explore what we're going to do and think about, what does it mean, where we can write a manifesto for our project and really define the project in the most ambitious way to create the most value, because that's the moment at which we decide how much value we can create.
So creating that space is a big challenge. And our next question actually gets to some of the problems in contemporary life with that challenge. And they're asking, Bruce, can you speak to the tension that many decision makers face between the short term and the long term? Short-term returns, long-term returns. One aspect of modernity is the increasingly short timeframes for evaluating the quality of our decisions. It gets me to start thinking of one of the people that influenced my life was Lou Kahn, and he would work on a building for 25 years. These days, an architect's lucky to work on a building for 25 days until they have to crank something out. So how do we wrestle with this increasing time pressure and the short term versus the long term? Can you speak a little bit about that?
Yeah, it's a fantastic question. It's interesting because I've had a kind of Lou Kahn experience in my life, that I work with people. I've worked with Michael Crow for 13 or 14 years now. I worked with my friend Sanford Quinter for over 30 years. I worked with Frank Gehry for decades. So I've had that experience, and I realized that it's part of my methodology, sensibility, way of living, that I'm in it for the long haul, that I'm committed when I do these things. And so part of it is that, but the kind of more, in some ways more urgent, timely question is, how to do it now, how to start doing that. And one of the principles in MC24 is design the time of your life, because Ben Franklin was wrong. Time is not money. Time is way more valuable than money. If you lose money, you can get it back. If you lose time, it's gone forever. If you lose that opportunity to, see your kid's birthday or graduation or your wife's anniversary, if you lose that, it's gone. And so really thinking about time as a design practice, that the real product of our work is time. The real product of our work isn't a physical thing. It's a time with that thing. It's a time in that environment. It's a time that the real product of our work is time. So starting to work on designing your time in every way, how we spend our days, how we make decisions, how we frame things in the bigger picture, so that we can think long term and start to introduce that language. It's not going to be instantaneously different. It's a long-term transformation. We need to think about the long-term implications of what we're doing. I think that is starting to change in the way that we do our business, and certainly not everyone and not everywhere. But if you look at what they're teaching at the McEwen School, right? They're teaching methodologies that are thousands of years old to understand a much bigger picture, longer term way of thinking about what you're doing, and really start to put your work into that context.
What I hear you saying is that there can be an opportunity loss if you rush to a solution and don't create that space that you're talking about that gives you the time and the opportunity to explore what really is the issue at hand, which I think is something that you have to help your boss or your client to understand, that there could be a huge loss if we rush ahead. So our last question that we're going to have today is, excuse me, is really about a problem that I think every business leader is facing right now. And that is, we are currently, most of us, working online. We're about to move back, maybe. So what's the future of the office space and how we work, given the incredible learning experience that we all just had this previous year?
Yeah, that's a great question. I don't know. I don't know there is an answer to that, but I think we're going to figure out the answer together over this year. Like I say, one of the biggest impacts is that it just kind of cleared the decks in a way. It opened up a kind of space for thinking differently. I mean, at Freeman, we've been designing new studios during this process. Project that we had in play before the pandemic hit, and so we needed to continue those. But I have to say that the changing conditions has given us an opportunity to rethink what we think those places are going to be, and they're going to be much more dynamic, collaborative, creative spaces, and much more about kind of creative production than we had originally planned. And so I think that is a great new thing. I mean, to make a more creatively productive place and really make the most of our time together. I think that like we never really thought about our time together as a value. Right? It was more like an obligation. Now we realize, wow, it was a huge value. Like being together. What happens when you're together is really magical, and that live experience is so valuable. And so, really understanding, what that can be and why we should do it, and not just do it by default, but really do it intentionally and creatively and productively.
Yeah, our mutual friend, Ken Weissman, talks about the intentionality of coming to the office. And I particularly like the idea that you just put forward, that one of those intentionalities is actually the creative problem-solving process, getting a bunch of people together face to face.
Yeah, I have to extend a special thanks to Ken for the introduction and the opportunity to do this today.
So Bruce, I want to thank you for a wonderful hour and 10 minutes of chatting with you and hearing your thoughts about the challenges that we face in the 21st century and the optimism that you spoke about when you started your remarks. I'm walking away feeling much more optimistic about tomorrow than I did earlier. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you there.
Bruce and David, let me add to that. We thank you. Really appreciate the thoughtful discussion, and really enjoyed all the takeaways. So many things, made a lot of notes. David, thank you for leading that Q&A. Certainly was very thoughtful. And again, I want to thank Terry and TD Bank. They made this another memorable Morningstar Speaker Series event. Everyone, have a wonderful day, and we look forward to seeing you soon. Thank you.
Thank you, John.